Well, hey, everybody, it's your boy, Mr. Perry, and here we are again, back at it. Unit 9, Lesson 2. This time we're going to talk about constructors and the keyword super. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, hopefully you have the handout with you that I gave in class, which has the program code for the animal and bird superclass and subclasses. So, what I have here is a UML just kind of showing you what's what. So the animal class is over here, and it has name, is pet, and age, as well as all of the get and set methods and toString method. Whereas over here, the bird class, which is a subclass of animal, so it automatically inherits all of this stuff. But it also is going to include a Boolean called needs cage, as well as a string called food type. And so because of that, we need to have all of the get and set methods specific to the bird subclass. Now, bird is an animal, so bird objects inherit all of the animal class's instance variables and methods. So if we break down the code here, here is the superclasses class header and constructor. You got public class animal and your private instance variables, and then our fully parameterized constructor, public animal, and again, it's got name, is pet, and age. All of the instance variables are being instantiated to be the value of the arguments with this part right here. And then down here, here is a call to the superclasses constructor. Animal, my animal equals new animal, Yoshi, false, and 12. So that should be pretty familiar to you guys, should be pretty straightforward. Now let's go ahead and look at the subclass, the bird classes, class header and constructor. So public class bird extends animal. Again, we have to add the word extends into animal in order to create the subclass. And then you'll notice we have some instance variables as well as a fully parameterized constructor. And down here we've got the call to the subclasses constructor. Well, let's go ahead and break this down and see what's happening. So again, the keyword extends means that bird is a subclass of animal. So we get all of the instance variables and methods that are labeled public, we automatically get them. So now next, the only instance variables I need to include in the bird subclass are the instance variables that are unique to that subclass, since the others are all inherited. And then down here, the constructor signature for the subclass needs to include the parameters for the superclass as well as the subclass's instance variables. So they all have to be included in this fully parameterized constructor header here. And then super, name, is pet, and age. What this does is this calls the constructor of the superclass using the instance variables for the superclass's constructor. So when the Java compiler gets to this part right here, it goes to the superclass's constructor, public animal, and again, name, is pet, and age matches up with what is expected here. You have to remember that the constructors are not inherited by the subclass, so you have to have this line right here, super, in order to call the superclass's constructor. So that takes care of that, and then again, the only other things you would need would be to finish the subclass's constructor by instantiating the instance variables that are unique to the subclass. Again, in this case, needs cage and food type just need to be instantiated. And then finally, down here, here is a call to this subclass's constructor. Bird, my bird equals new bird, Tweety, true, 5, and then true and seed get passed in for needs cage and food type. So, just remember that in inheritance, the subclass inherits all public methods from the superclass. So the only methods that need to be added to the subclass are the get and set methods for the subclass's instance variables. So you automatically get, because of inheritance, you get name, get pet status, get age, as well as set name, set pet status, and set age. And then if there are any other public methods in the animal class, again, the bird class automatically gets them. So the only methods that would need to be defined in the bird class are needs cage, get needs cage, get food type, set needs cage, and set foods type. So there you go. And then an interesting thing happens with the toString method. So the animal class's toString method creates a string variable called aInfo and sets it equal to the string that you see here, where we're concatenating name, is pet, and age to some text. And then it just goes ahead and, returns our string variable. Down here, for the bird class, the first thing that it does is, and we're doing something different, string aInfo equals, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to call super.toString. What this does is this calls the superclass's toString method, and again, that returns all of this text right here to this portion. And then again, you can just concatenate from there needs a cage plus needs cage, and then type of food, and then food type. And then you would return the string down here. So what we learn here is you can actually call a method from a superclass by just saying super dot and then name of the method. So super.toString calls the superclass's toString method and does all of this for us and returns it, concatenates it right here. And then again, we would just concatenate to that what we need for the subclass. All right, and there's a few other notes to keep in mind regarding constructors. If we go back to Unit 5, in Unit 5 we learned that if you write a class and if you don't include any constructor, Java will provide a no argument constructor that automatically sets the instance variables to their default values. Now, subclasses do not inherit the constructor of a superclass, so that is why we use the keyword super. This is what calls the superclass's constructor. So if you write a subclass, and if you do not include a call to super in the subclass's constructor, Java will provide one automatically, and it will set the superclass's instance variables to their default values. So that could cause, some confusion, and it's just an important note to keep in mind. Typically, we avoid this by just basically overriding constructors. And as long as you define constructors and then override constructors in your subclasses, then you're fine. But if you don't include that call to super, it's just important to note that Java, just like up here, Java automatically will provide it and will set the instance variables to their default values. And then there's one other thing we want to get into, which is called the chain of initialization. So the chain of initialization refers to the sequence of constructor calls that occur when an object of a subclass is created. So when a new object is instantiated, the constructor of the subclass is invoked, and it in turn calls the constructor of its superclass, and so on up the inheritance hierarchy until the constructor of the topmost superclass, which would be the object class, unless there is an explicit superclass that is defined by using the keyword extends. But when that finally gets called, that's when the constructor calls stop. And then what happens is the chain unwinds with each constructor completing its execution in reverse order. Now this will make a little bit more sense when we look at an actual example. So here's where I would encourage you to pause the video and read through the program code that you see here and see if you can figure out what will print and in what order. So, feel free to pause the video and do that now. I'm going to go ahead and break this down, and we'll go ahead and figure this out. So I'm going to go ahead and jump down here to main, because we know that that's what Java does. It'll jump down here, it'll find main, and it'll say, okay, what happens first? Well, my dog 1 equals new dog. So here we are calling the no argument constructor of the dog class. So here we're going to go into the dog classes, the subclass, and here is public dog. So this is the no argument constructor. Now the first thing it does is it calls the superclass's parameterized constructor with the argument generic animal. So up here in the animal class, we have a no argument constructor and we have a parameterized constructor. So this is going to call this line of code. And as you can see, this dot name is equal to name, and then it prints animal constructor called with name called, and that's going to go ahead and concatenate generic animal to this line. And that goes ahead and concludes this line of code right here. But it also prints dog constructor called. So when we call that, so when this first line of code executes, what we end up getting is animal constructor with name called, generic animal, and then dog constructor called. And again, that's because we went into the no argument constructor here and we saw the super, the call to the superclasses parameterized constructor. So this line right here finally prints with generic animal. And then again, we go down to this next line of code, which says now we need to print dog constructor called. So that's what happened there. Now we're going to get to our next line of code. So this is now done. And so now we got to dog, my dog 2 equals new dog with buddy and golden retriever. So that's going to call the dog classes fully parameterized constructor, name and breed. And the first thing it does is it calls the superclasses parameterized constructor with name. This time name is buddy. So buddy gets passed in, and then buddy becomes the value of our instance variable. And then we're going to get animal constructor with name called, and this time we're expecting to see buddy. So that takes us back to here, and this is now done. And then this dot breed equals breed, so golden retriever gets instantiated to, or breed gets instantiated to be golden retriever. And now we're going to print dog constructor with name and breed called, and we're expecting to see buddy, comma, and then golden retriever. And then sure enough, that's what happens. Animal constructor with name called, buddy. Dog constructor with name called, with name and breed called, and then buddy, golden retriever. So, again, this is kind of like those bounce around questions that we looked at before, or the Java Jiu-Jitsu questions. And it's really just a matter of understanding, what is calling what, and understanding how the super keyword works with your constructors. All right, so lesson review time. Subclasses do not have access to the private instance variables in a superclass that they extend. Constructors are also not inherited. So a superclass constructor must be called from the first line of a subclass constructor by using the keyword super and then passing in the appropriate parameters. If there is no explicit call to super, an implicit call to super will be added by the Java compiler. The actual parameters passed into the call of the to super provide the values that the superclasses constructor can use to initialize the object's instance variables. And then regardless of whether the superclasses constructor is called implicitly or explicitly, the process of calling superclass constructors continues until the object constructor is called. At this point, all of the constructors within the hierarchy execute, beginning with the object constructor, unless, of course, a different superclass has been created using the extends keyword, which again, most of the time, that's what happens. All right, guys, well, that's it for this lesson. Hopefully everything makes sense. Leave a question or a comment in in our assignment here, and I'll just see you in class. Thanks so much.